So first of all, we are very grateful for all of the panel speakers who gave us your time. And I'm so proud of our mastermind member, Micaela. So Micaela is one of our youngest member who actually took initiative to host this event, which we can have a very important conversation and help curate the panel. And I want to shout out to our teams here, Kate Kelly, our event producer for today, and Aisha, who helped us connect to Jill. So Micaela, you are one of the most amazing members we have ever had, and your role currently is as the Vice President of Global Business Development at the Samarian Group. Before Samarian Group, you did product management for KPMG, and you also earned a Bachelor of Science degree at NYU. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to you.
Summer, thank you so much for the introduction, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. I really wanted to get this group of amazing individuals together to speak about this pressing topic. I really wanted to create awareness on anti-Semitism and staying silent. Brief bit, can everyone hear me? Sorry, I can see my connection is, okay, great. So recently, I would say about a few weeks ago, I was home and I was on my way to work and my mom happened to be with me. And before I got out the door, my mother said, "Micaela, wait." And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "If someone stops you on the street today and asks you if you're Jewish, do you know what to say?" And I thought to myself, yes, I know. I say no. And that moment, I realized the severity of what is going on and the fact that my mother felt the need to tell me that in order to make sure that her child stays safe today. And I'm just so appreciative for everyone to be here. And I would like to ask everyone a quick question. If everyone could write in the chat how many Jews they think are in the world, I'd greatly appreciate it. Let's see, take like a second. Let's see, anyone? Okay, thank you for those who responded. Some of you are close, some of you are close, some of you are far away. Well, I would like to let you all know that there are actually 14 million Jews in the world. That is very small. And to put that into perspective, Leonardo DiCaprio, who we all know, he has about 48 million followers on Instagram. So that's about 3 times the Jewish population that follows Leonardo DiCaprio. And so out of this panel, I just really want to see similar support for the Jewish people as they have supported other causes. And thank you. So I think now we could probably introduce the panel speakers. Arnie, do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Arnie Herz, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I am the president of AJC, American Jewish Committee, Long Island, and also a lawyer in private practice focused on business law, complex conflict, trademark, and really thrilled to be here in this very important program.
Thank you so much, Arnie. Jill, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. First, just a huge thank you to Fyli for organizing this, and thank you for allowing me to be part of it. My name is Jill Wagner. I am an anchor at Cheddar. I have a podcast that I put out in the morning. It's the Cheddar Need to Know podcast. I previously was an anchor at CBS, News 12 Long Island. So that's just a little bit of background on me.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, Adela.
Thank you, and thank you again for having me here. My name's Adela. I'm a Syrian Lebanese Mexican Jew. I was a student at NYU. I'm currently a Jewish activist because I filed the first Title VI case against an academic institution addressing anti-Semitism as a form of discrimination. I also officially represented Jewish students at the United Nations for 2 years.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Well, I would love to dive into some questions because I know that we're pressed on time. So first, I would like to ask you, Jill, What are some of the biggest misconceptions about the Jewish community from your perspective?
I think some of the biggest misconceptions about the Jewish community, I think it's similar to misconceptions that we see about other minority groups, which is that we're a monolith. And the truth is that Jews are quite diverse in every regard. And that includes even skin color. There are Black Jews, Asian Jews, Middle Eastern Jews, white Jews, Persian Jews, Jews, some are rich, some are poor, and everything in between. I'm glad you mentioned the number of Jews that exist on this planet. There's about 14 million, as you mentioned. Comparatively, there are about 1.8 billion Muslims and more than 2 billion Christians. And there were actually fewer Jews living on this planet right now than before World War II and the Holocaust, which it's incredible. I mean, the Holocaust, it really killed 1 out of every 3 Jewish people that were on this planet, which is just, when you think about that in those terms, it's kind of startling. And I mentioned this not as kind of like to give like a history lesson, but I think it's helpful to take a kind of that 25,000 foot view, to step back as we're establishing this conversation. And when you talk about skin color even, I think that it's important because so much of our current thinking has become kind of binary, where it's broken down into this Black versus white narrative, or, oppressor versus oppressed, or colonizer versus colonized. And I think that's a misconception when it comes to Jews. It's like a square peg, round hole type of thing. And it really doesn't work if you understand that full Jewish picture. In Israel, for example, Jews, and this is unrelated to anything political, it's about 50% technically like people of color. And again, I mention this because I'm Jewish, I'm Ashkenazi, which means my family is from Eastern Europe. And growing up, most of my friends were the same. And I didn't even realize the diversity within the Jewish community until recently, until I started doing some research on it. So I just think it's important to have that understanding.
Absolutely, thank you. If anyone has anything else to add, please feel free.
If I could chime in for 1 minute. When, I was born in Mexico City, and I'm a Syrian Lebanese Jew. And my whole life, I had family around the world. When my family had to leave Syria and Lebanon, they kind of scattered. So I grew up in Mexico City. I traveled to Brazil because I had family there. I traveled to France, to London, and I never really realized that the only type of Jew I knew was Middle Eastern Jews. And when I moved to the US, I realized how different the community in the US was. Because exactly like Jill said, when you take a step back, you realize how when you grow up in a small community, or you grow up thinking you're so worldly, you realize how much more out there is. So, coming from a different Jewish point of view, I also got to see the way anti-Semitism manifests differently depending on where the community is. For example, in the US, whatever form of hatred anti-Semitism takes is different from the way that it, for example, takes up in Latin America. Latin America is highly religious. So the anti-Semitism you see there is more the classic anti-Semitism, the Judaism versus Christianity, the Jew as the Christ killer anti-Semitism. Where in the US, it's a little bit more complicated, and it's a little bit different from what you'll see. So throughout the conversation, I'll be talking about different types of anti-Semitism and what you see rising today.
Thank you very much. And so Adela, based on that, what do you think people need to know about the Jewish community?
Well, one thing I think is very important is, and of course, not for a history lesson, but to take a step back and realize what exactly is Judaism. Judaism isn't just a belief. It isn't just the idea that you believe in a certain religion or in a certain book or a certain scripture. Judaism really is a peoplehood. And when it comes to Judaism, you'll see time and time again that regardless of whether or not you'd like to identify as a Jew is a Jew. Of course, the most famous example is the Holocaust, where it doesn't matter who you were. If you were Jewish, suddenly that made you a target, and that justified your extermination. In the Middle East, it was a little bit different. My family, thank God, did not go through the Holocaust. But for us in the Middle East, Jewish people had full business contributions. They were part of society the same way Jews in Europe were. But suddenly being a Jew became being a Jew, regardless of any other view. And again, it became almost impossible for Jews to be there. So I think that the most important thing for people to know about the Jewish community is how Judaism manifests as a peoplehood and not a religion. It's not like you can just say, well, if you believed differently, then there wouldn't be this hatred. Because what you see here in New York, if they ask if you're a Jew, they're not asking if you're conservative, if you're Orthodox, if you're modern Orthodox, if you're Reform. They're not asking your level of religion. They're asking it on a base of peoplehood and ethnicity, which is something that a lot of people don't understand.
Thank you. Arnie, do you have anything to add to this?
I think it's been perfectly covered by Jill and Adela. Really tremendous. I'm enjoying just listening and hearing the clarity and the deep understanding. So and which is rare for me to not have anything to really add here. But I'll hold for our next question.
No, of course, but based on that, I would like for us to touch on, Arnie, why do we see and why do we feel that anti-Semitism is on the rise currently?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that, as Jill said, take a 25,000 foot view. I think that the main reason is that there's been global and societal changes over the past number of years. And that leaves many people feeling unsettled. And when people feel unsettled, they tend to find scapegoats. And of course, the Jews are the classic scapegoat. And we're not the only one. I mean, as we've seen very problematically, Asians, Muslims, many different people are scapegoated, but Jews are the classic scapegoat. And of course, we see with this unsettling, the rise of the Jew as the scapegoat. And then since COVID, we've seen a massive increase over the last 2 months because of the conflict in Gaza. And setting aside all the nuances and complexities of that, the question then becomes, why is it that the Jewish people are held responsible for the actions of a foreign government? And we know that that is problematic. When we saw that Chinese Americans were being held responsible for what was happening to China, we knew that this was wrong and outrageous. And we knew that any group of people, that Muslims were being held responsible for 9/11, that was wrong and outrageous. And here we see an incredible rise of anti-Semitism over the last 2 months, where Jewish diners in Los Angeles and people walking in the streets in New York and globally, where it seems to be fair game to attack Jews without even understanding what their political leanings are, what their belief is about the state of Israel, and so on and so forth. And so we've seen that rising tremendously. And then we also see, there's a convergence of a number of other societal trends. More specifically, we see, as already been said, the binary of seeing the world in oppressor versus oppressed, in that victim mindset and we see that, we also see that there's a certain, once someone's tainted, there's such a lack of forgiveness in the culture today. I was listening to a podcast, honestly, Barry Weiss's new podcast, and she was portraying the story of a Palestinian man who had grown up in a refugee camp and came to this country and built a hugely successful hummus business in Minneapolis. And his daughter had made a statement, a 16-year-old daughter made a statement 10 years ago, criticizing Jews and blacks and people who are overweight. And he lost his contract with all the major retailers, and there's been an absolute lack of forgiveness and understanding for a mistake that this girl made. So we see a lack of forgiveness that's happening as well. And then of course we see on the right that there's been an unabashed fear and hatred from the far right and QAnon and so on and so forth. So that's it in a nutshell.
And I also think that one thing that I would love to just let everyone know, that there's obviously a difference between being Jewish, which is, a peoplehood, a religion, something that you identify, and then your nationality. So I think a lot of people, just to clarify, Jews are also not Israelis. That doesn't mean they're from Israel. Just like how if you are Catholic, you are not from Rome. Not everyone's from Rome. So I just want to explain that and just make sure that everyone is on the same page. And perhaps, Adela, you could dive into how you've personally been affected by the actions of others.
Of course. And I think, you said something extremely important when it comes to the nationality aspect. When I talk about my experiences of what happened at NYU, people always ask me, you filed your case because you were Jewish. And I said, no, I filed my case because I was an NYU student, but because of my Judaism, I was being treated differently and unfairly. And that's the same thing when it comes to nationality. I'm a citizen of Mexico. I've been living in the US, not a citizen yet, but I will be one day. And my friends are American citizens here, and I have friends that are citizens of different places. But the problem becomes when suddenly your Judaism becomes an excuse to discount your nationality. People who live in the US who are Jewish are just as American as anyone else. And you see the same thing, for example, when we were talking about the Asian community that was getting scapegoated for the coronavirus. And they were saying, and you see this also in World War II, what happened to the Japanese, where suddenly an ethnicity or a peoplehood or this other identity marker that you had somehow made you less American, which is completely unfounded and completely bizarre. So for personal experiences, when I was at NYU, I represented the Jewish community on student government. I was extremely involved in the Jewish community, and I became the face of it. Which was really great, but really scary in a lot of ways. And after a lot of rise of anti-Semitic events where you had a Jewish student physically assaulted in the middle of Washington Square Park, we had an Israeli flag burned in the middle of the park. And when it comes to burning that flag, of course, flag burning is a political statement, but Title VI, which is discrimination laws in the US, didn't apply to religion in any way. They only applied to nationality and to race and ethnicity. At that point, it became, had any other flag been burned of any other country, it would have been an act of discrimination. But when it came to the Jewish flag, it was considered strictly political. And I had to take a step back and say, why is it okay to burn my flag? And why is it okay to physically assault one of my members? And the more this grew, the more the Jewish community started feeling isolated. And I had students coming out to me saying, do I hide my Magen David? If I have a sticker on my computer that has a big Israeli star on it, do I take that off of my computer? How do I walk into my classes knowing that the Jewish community is being openly boycotted by 53 student groups on campus? And that was an eye-opening experience. And it was very difficult to be in the position where I didn't know what steps to take. And when I did want to file my case against NYU, the Jewish community told me, it's NYU, we have a big Jewish community here, we have it so good, do you want to draw attention to the issue? And that's when I realized what anti-Semitism truly is. When you're being discriminated against and you're afraid to speak up about it because things could be worse. And that's an abusive relationship where you say, at least they're not. But you have to reset the standard. And the standard is that discrimination against anyone, including the Jewish community, should not be something that academic institutions are, condoning in any single way. So that's why I decided to file my case. And then when I went on to represent the Jewish community at the United Nations, I realized how many misconceptions there are just because the community is so small. So, what I've been doing hopefully is speaking up about these experiences, talking to other people and telling them what the community goes through, because you can't expect anyone to know your struggle if you don't share it with them.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. In addition to that, Jill, would you be open to sharing how you've been personally affected by the actions of others?
Yeah, I've been pretty open to say that I'm really scared. I'm scared for myself. I'm scared for my family. I'm scared for my friends. Micaela, that example that you gave, it really stayed with me. Just that idea of like, what would you do if someone asked you if you were Jewish? And I've thought that with what happened in West Hollywood, where you had these men walking with these Palestinian flags asking who's Jewish. And I thought, what would I do if I was eating outside at a restaurant and somebody said, are you Jewish? And I was like, I don't know. I am proudly Jewish, but I don't know if I was with my daughter and my family, what would I do? I really don't know. And that's a scary thing. I send my daughter to a Jewish school, and during this recent round of violence where Jews were literally being attacked on the streets, and I actually shouldn't say were, it's still happening, and it happens all the time. It's just not really covered, and it's just not. It's unfortunate. And the first thing I did is I called the school director and I said, "What are you doing? What's the plan? Do we have enhanced security?" And she said, yeah, she explained to me, told me what she could tell me, because obviously a lot of it was not for public knowledge. And I mentioned this, I have a podcast that I do, and my co-host is not Jewish. And I was talking about this, and he said, it is so sad that you need to worry about security for your 2.5-year-old daughter when she goes to school. And I said, no, but you don't understand. That's on a good day, we worry about security. There are security guards outside of synagogues and Jewish schools on the best of days, and it's really just quite sad. But besides for the practical concerns that I have on a day-to-day basis about growing anti-Semitism, I do worry about the bigger picture of just this normalization of anti-Jewish sentiment, and this idea that somehow standing with the Jewish community is controversial. And I've never felt that way in my entire life. And I can't believe it's gotten to this point. Rutgers recently, I'm not sure if you guys are all familiar, put out a statement during just this wave of new violence condemning anti-Semitism. And then they put out a statement apologizing for the statement that they put out condemning anti-Semitism. And what kind of message is that sending to Jewish students there? When Adela talks about her experiences at NYU, that frightens me as somebody who has a Jewish daughter who is eventually going to go to college, and what kind of environment and hostility is she going to be facing? I would like her to feel proud to be Jewish and not have to feel like she has to hide it.
Absolutely. And that is just what you touched on, something in regards to like, why don't we feel that more people are not outraged by this in these ongoing acts of anti-Semitism? And Arnie, perhaps you could lead off with this question. I mean, we've seen a lot of silence, and it's concerning, to all of us, and that's why we're here today. So why do you think people aren't as outraged?
I just want to go back to what Jill said. My daughter is at Rutgers, and so it hits home. Getting that release, the first one, which was, you're so happy that it was a clear condemnation, and then just absolutely stunned that it was reversed after that. On to your question about why more people aren't outraged. I think there's a number of factors. One, people are very busy with their lives, and they're not aware as to what the real problems are in the world. People are very consumed on their day-to-day, and the world is has a tremendous number of problems. So I just think it's a lack of awareness. Two is that to the extent that they're aware, they don't believe it's a big problem for the Jews. And the Jews they perceive as powerful, and it's not a real, when you look at all the injustices in the world, it doesn't make the top of the list or anywhere close to the top of the list. And certainly for themselves, they don't see that it's relevant. It's not, certainly not poignant for themselves. It's like the same thing. Like the AJC, we've focused on some of the discrimination, in all over the world, and what's happening in China, what happens in different places, and most people are just not aware. And then I think that another element is a rationalization of the anti-Semitism because of the actions of Israel. We see a lot of that it's justifiable. You could understand why people are upset because of what Israel's doing and the perceived persecution that Israel's perpetrating. Therefore, that somehow justifies people being angry with Jews who are dining in Los Angeles. And again, echoing an earlier comment, another one is it doesn't fit into the narrative of the oppressor or victim. Again, Jews seen as powerful. They can't be both an oppressor and a victim at the same time. And then I think that there's a lot of inherent and not such inherent bias against Jews about the way people were raised in society. And listen, we all have certain biases, and certainly, particularly people not born in a Jewish family have certain biases. Not everyone, of course, but there's that inherent underpinning. And I think those things all come together of why people aren't feeling outraged. And American Jewish Committee created a campaign called "Where's the Outrage?" Hashtag "Where's the Outrage?" to get people fired up about these, this injustice.
If I could hop on really quickly on something that both Arnie and Jill mentioned, which is, conflating and holding Jews responsible for the actions of a foreign country. And for example, when I was, in college, I was the only Jewish person in my Middle Eastern studies classes and in my Arabic classes. And for 2 years, everything was fine. And then suddenly I became the Jew, the Zionist. And no one ever asked me what my politics were, but suddenly no one would work with me on any of my projects. I had to do my final projects by myself. I was being boycotted by my fellow students. I had to take my final exams in a separate room. And one day when I was leaving a student government meeting, I started getting surrounded by different members of student government that started yelling disgusting atrocities to me. I'm not Israeli. I was not born in Israel. I never lived in Israel. I don't have family in Israel even. But suddenly they're telling me that just like every SS officer was so proud to be a Nazi, I'm proudly a Jew. And that was a moment that really hit me, because I was standing there in the circle of people, of peers, of people I had been in student government with for 2 years and classes with. And suddenly I wasn't me anymore. Me, Adela Cojab, the Syrian Lebanese Mexican Jew, and that eats kanafe with her family, all these things that I am, and all the way that they got to know me suddenly didn't matter anymore, because all they saw was the Jew, and they used the word Zionist without ever asking me. And that was the biggest moment for me, when I realized it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter the relationships that you have. If people want to hate something, they can. And when it comes to Judaism, again, what's hated at the time, the Jew becomes the easy scapegoat. In Soviet Russia, the Jew was the money-hungry capitalist. In the US, the Jew can be seen as, the power hungry. It's all of these same things, all the same stereotypes between blood libels, between controlling of the media. All of the same things we've been seeing are just transforming to whatever everyone else wants to see too. And that's why the Jew is so malleable, because we're so few and because we're so easy to put out there, and dissociation of the person with whatever is perceived to be the Jew of the time.
Thank you so much. And I just want to let everyone know, for those who don't understand what Zionism is, it means that you are, quote unquote, for the country of Israel. So if you're a Zionist, it means that you believe in that being an established country or state of Israel. And also I'd like to mention that just because someone is Jewish, which means that's their religion, that's their manhood, quote unquote, does not mean that they believe in Israel or are a Zionist. So I just would like to clarify that as well. And I apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt. Jill, did you have anything to add to that sentiment?
I just think on that idea of Zionism, I'm glad that you touched upon it, and I don't want this to be turned into a political discussion, because I know that that's not what Fyli is about. But Zionism has been turned into really kind of like a dirty word, and I've seen it just happening on social media. And as you say, it's really just the belief that there should be a state of Israel, a Jewish state in Israel, and that's it. And it doesn't mean you're anti-Palestinian. You could be a Zionist and pro-Palestinian and believe that there's a two-state solution and that there should be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. So I think that, I just think that that's an important point to be made. And I think that that's one of the big problems. I mean, in terms of just Judaism and where we are right now, this moment in terms of anti-Semitism, it feels different than in the past. And anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred. It's been around for thousands of years. But what feels different is that I think, especially in the United States, we saw the Charlottesville riots, for example, where people were marching and shouting, "Jews will not replace us." We're kind of used to that type of anti-Semitism, and not like that's no big deal, but that's something that I think we can process. And when Arnie touched on, where's the outrage? I think it's hard to process anti-Semitism coming from a different place, from maybe the far left and not the far right. And that's not to say criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. You could criticize, Jews criticize Israel. It's a different thing. But what we're seeing in terms of some of this hatred, I think it's hard for us to process. I think for some Jews, it's hard to even identify it and fully process it.
Absolutely, thank you. And so, a question for everyone, but perhaps we can start with Arnie. What contributions are you making personally to help build these bridges where anti-Semitism exists? Like, how can we build a bridge? How can members of Fyli, support and build bridges with us?
Thank you for that question. For me personally, I'm very involved in the work of the American Jewish Committee, which to me is a preeminent organization that works globally to build bridges. We have the Jewish Muslim Coalition, we have the Black Jewish Coalition, we have groundbreaking work between the Jewish and Christian religion, and AJC has been around for over 115 years. Just before COVID in January 2020, AJC hosted over 50 leading Muslim clerics in the world to Auschwitz for a visit. And this included the head of the World Muslim League. This included the head cleric in Mecca. It was an extraordinary event, and it was covered by the press. This was not something they wanted under the radar screen. New York Times covered it, all the press outlets covered it, and there they were on a full day tour and praying at Auschwitz and saying never again. And so we build bridges with different communities to understand that we're all in this together. And we've created what's called the coalition of conscience of virtually every single faith group to say what is acceptable and not acceptable, and to stand together where we have incidents like that. And so that's one from like a bigger perspective. Another one is, for me personally, is to really be educated on what's going on, to get beneath the conversation. And you can't get beneath the conversation unless you read different perspectives, unless you travel, unless you meet with people, and you're really taking what they're saying. One of the most fascinating trips for me was in 2018. I went to the West Bank. I wanted to see that for myself. And I read about it, and I met with Palestinians, and I met with Jews, and I met with Palestinians and Jews who are working together, developing economic opportunity and various different opportunities together. Some who were aligned politically, and some who disagreed. And so you understand that there's the reality of what we see above the ground, and then of course, like a tree, there's a whole root system underneath. And if we really want to resolve an issue, and we really want to bring about unity, it's to really understand it from a much deeper way, and to figure out, is my upset helping create the world that I want to create? Or is my upset just adding more anger and divisiveness into the world? There's so many people who are upset for various different causes because they don't like the disharmony and the anger and the discrimination that it entails, and yet that's what they're feeding into the system. So how do we bring about true harmony and connection between people to advance society, and understand we're not always going to see eye to eye, that sometimes we can have certain common issues, and then we can agree to disagree on other issues to work towards.
Arnie, definitely, and building consensus and personal connection is very important. Jill, do you have anything to add as well before we open it up for questions?
I think that idea of the personal connection is everything. And I've thought about the past year and even myself just learning about other minority groups in this country and in terms of what Black Americans have gone through. And what always has stuck with me are the personal stories. And I remember just watching an interview with a mother who was saying how she has to talk to her kids about what to do if they have an encounter with police. And I just thought, oh my God, I could not even imagine what that's like. I didn't know about that experience. And it just, all of a sudden, I just had a better idea of what that day-to-day life is like. And so that's kind of what I try to do, if anybody will listen, is just take the politics out, because at the end of the day, we're all just people. We just want to live and have happiness and have our children have a better life than we have. So as much as possible, kind of just dialing down the rhetoric a little bit and remembering that we're in this together, and hate is hate is hate. And really, I just feel like we should all kind of be standing against that.
Absolutely, thank you. And I believe we only have a couple minutes left. So I would love to open it up for any questions. If you don't feel comfortable speaking on here, I'm happy if you want to private message me your question. I can ask the group, however you feel comfortable.
Question. It's partial question. Do you agree that we've missed the boat? I think over last year's BLM movement really highlighted that it's hard to argue that anyone has suffered more than Jews have historically, but we've missed the public relations boat. And what I mean by that is there's two sides to this. One is Americans make up probably 40% of Jews around the world. I think that's approximate, and you saw the response. And as Jill just said, hate is hate. And we really haven't gotten that message across. And as a community, we're the perfect origin to just push that message. Second of all, I don't think that we've done a good job of trying to change minds either. If people understood what, and I won't go on, this will be a question in a second. So
okay, just for the sake of time, Brad, if you wouldn't mind just asking your question, I'd really appreciate it.
Do you agree that there should be a public relations effort?
I think everyone agrees, yes.
Okay, that was easy.
If I could take just a couple of words on that. One thing when it comes to the Jewish community is that because we have been persecuted for so long in so many ways, wherever we've been, we kind of keep to ourselves, where we have a very strong communal structure, right? We have our synagogue, we have the Jewish schools, you know, Jewish kids grow up knowing that they're Jewish. And that's why we never really turn outwards sometimes. And we don't want to talk about the struggle of being Jewish because of the same issue I saw at NYU, where you're afraid to draw attention to problems because you know how much worse it can be. And I think that that's something that internally we have to gather strength to come to be able to combat it. And I do see it happening a lot with college students. I see college students that are more than ever becoming proud of their Jewish identities because they realize that when they don't speak up, they are left behind. And if they don't speak up, they let hatred fester. One of the things that happened at NYU was when everything first started springing up, the Jewish community came together and wrote a letter. It was a coalition of all the Jewish groups at NYU at the time, and it was calling out some anti-Semitism that we were seeing. And the night before we were going to publish, someone came up to me and said, "Are you sure you want to publish an open letter about anti-Semitism? Because you're really going to be drawing attention to the problem." And ultimately, we decided not to. And then if you look at what happened at the next 4 months without publishing a letter united coming out against anti-Semitism, everything ended up escalating without us doing anything about it. In that, you know, we still had our flag burned, we still had a Jewish student physically assaulted, NYPD got involved. It led to a lawsuit that changed the law on a national level when it comes to anti-Semitism. And at least when I look back, I know I didn't prompt it because we didn't publish that letter, but it's still my biggest regret. Because why as Jews are we so afraid to say we are hurting and our community is being targeted? And I think that that's something that, you know, the community is really working on. And it's an education situation. You have to tell your kids at home to be proud, of course, to take precautions, but to always know that they are part of whatever groups they're part of. If you're an NYU student, you're an NYU student. If you're an American citizen, you're an American citizen. And you are additionally Jewish. And don't let any of your identities overshine each other. Don't check your identities at the door. And don't be afraid to be your full self in every space you're in.
Absolutely. And Asia, one of our fellow Fyli members, she asked a question for you all. Perhaps Julie could take a stab at it. What would you like to see allies to the Jewish community to do right now?
Well, first of all, hi, Asia. And second, I just think even joining a conversation like this and just listening is everything. And I remember when we were doing the prep call for this, I was thanking the organizers at Fyli, and I said, you know, it's so brave of you to do this right now, and which is crazy. It is crazy that having a panel about anti-Semitism is considered brave at this moment in time, but it is. So I think just listening and maybe speaking up. Like I said, it's anti-Semitism is taking a different face right now. The face of anti-Semitism is not what we're used to. It's not necessarily a Nazi holding a flag with a swastika on it. So I just think it's listening perhaps for some of that language and being an ally and just calling it what it is, and speaking up. There's not many Jews in this world, as we talked about. So just kind of having our back a little is just, I think, incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I also wanted to let everyone know, because we are coming up on time, that if you do have any other questions, please contact the members of Fyli, and we can connect you with any of the panelists here, and they can answer any of your questions, of course, if you're comfortable. And I just really wanted to thank each one of you for being part of this panel and joining me. I know this, is your lunch hour and you took the time to do this, and I just wanted to thank you again to all of you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. What an incredible conversation. We are so grateful. We're going to drop our email contact information in the chat box, along with our website and social media handles. And if you would like to connect personally with any of our speakers or our moderator on this call here today, we are very happy to facilitate the introduction. Thank you so much to everyone for being a part of this important conversation, for sharing your personal stories, and for listening and learning.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Wishing everyone a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.